That feeling of insecurity is an issue that the person needs to address, whether they are a student.
And they won't be open to...
And they won't be open to addressing it.
Yes. Can you tell us what your link to the University of Malta is, who you are, and where were you in the life before the pandemic hit?
Who I am, I'm not sure yet. I'm still working on that. But my name is Michael. I teach philosophy in the Department of Philosophy in the Faculty of Arts. In life before the pandemic hit, I was exactly where I am now. Speaking with people, enjoying myself, relating to humanity, teaching, learning, mostly reading.
The life of the humanities.
What the pandemic did is make that a bit more virtual rather than real. So, you couldn't communicate so nearly and dearly as it was before.
I'm a University of Malta student. Well, I just graduated in theatre studies. I'm Denise. And where was I in life before the pandemic hit? So I was a second year. And right before the pandemic, I was on Erasmus. I was studying at Trinity College in Dublin. And I obviously had to cut my Erasmus experience short. I had to come back and finish my Erasmus online. But again, I was learning in a very different environment to the University of Malta, because their method of teaching is similar to the University of Malta, but also very, very different, especially in terms of the course content.
Yes.
So it was very interesting to experience how they taught in person and how they taught online.
Yes.
So as much as it kind of sucked that I had to come back, I also got the best of both worlds, because I experienced online teaching from two very varied perspectives and different sources, because then obviously third year was all online.
This says 56% of students have said that their mental health was affected by the pandemic, and naturally we know that lecturers were affected too. Do you relate to this, and how? Yes, I do relate to this. I mean, in the field that I work in, which is philosophy, working virtually, well, there is a scope for doing that for a bit, but it's collateral. It's not the philosophy. Philosophy is done with human lives, in human lives, living them and actually experiencing them. It can't be done virtually. So my answer to whether we were affected, I was certainly affected.
How do lecturers notice when students are starting to burn out or struggle, if at all, and do they take action to help? Similarly, do students realize when lecturers are struggling, and do they try to help?
Well, online it's very difficult to notice something like that. But in class, when they're with you, you do notice. I mean, sometimes students stare out in space while you're speaking, and you address them and they don't sort of respond. And to me, at least personally, that is an indication that things are not so as they should be. So I would, approach them or give them some space to see whether they want to speak about things like that. That's one way. Or sometimes you see that their level of work is very loose and
compared to their normal.
Compared to their intelligence, which you would know is very sharp, and you'd see that they are not expressing it. So what's going wrong with things? And yes, unfortunately, students do burn out. Then there are those cases where they would come up to you and say, listen, I'm going through this, I have this issue, I feel suicidal, or I got these sorts of messages often, or I feel depressed, or I don't want to continue this. Yeah, it worries me when I hear that, and it worries me even more when I try to address them to some form of help, and because of stigma, because of being afraid of how they are going to be viewed, they refuse it. That's a problem.
And I think it's a lot of it boils down to the whole aspect of noticing if students are burning out, and vice versa. I think it all boils down to communication, because like you said, sometimes it isn't that easily noticeable online, And even though you can't take it for granted, there has to be a level of communication where students do feel comfortable to address certain issues they should be able to feel comfortable to address these issues with certain lecturers. At least one lecturer in your faculty. It doesn't have to be all of them.
They have to identify.
Exactly, they have to identify the specific lecturer. And I think vice versa. I feel like sometimes lecturers do tend to hold back on speaking about what they're struggling with and how they're struggling because of what students will, how students will
But you need to remember that also lecturers are bound by certain ethical structures that are put there. Some of them are fair and right to be there, but sometimes they are, they are a bit overbearing and overwhelming. So if you're having a tutorial one-on-one, many lecturers would tend to want their door to be open, which transforms that relationship somewhat. Is there a way to find a balance between keeping students on track in their studies while still safeguarding the mental health of students?
What I saw did help a bit this year was, for example, faculties were some faculties more than others were sort of more lenient on maybe extensions and dissertation extensions, where you know that a student is struggling, so you give them more time. It's not a matter of, okay, you have to submit your dissertation and 7 assignments in the span of X amount of weeks, but it's like you can space them out accordingly, which I think, because mental health affected students in terms of their academic life so much, I think students being able to know that they can space things out and have space and time to breathe was sort of a form of balance for the students.
And honestly speaking, I think the administration itself is making a lot of progress in this. They are trying very, very hard to accommodate students.
There's even a COVID-19 clause in the extension
But
forms.
also aside from COVID, if a student needs to stop in second year, they can stay put and come in a year's time or come in 2 years' time. I don't know, there are all these laws and bylaws. I'm not very good with that. But I know that they are striving very hard to make students' lives as relaxed and as expansive as it needs to be,
which I think
which is necessary.
And some students are still not aware of this.
Well, one needs to ask, I think, and just ask the secretaries, ask the deans, ask the
and not be
heads
afraid
of departments,
to ask.
and not be afraid to ask. That is, I think, the main issue, both with keeping students in track in their studies, and both with safeguarding their mental. It's fear.
Yes.
If there is fear, I mean, there was one particular student who was an extraordinary student. I mean, I would say that there was genius there. And there was this mental issue that arose, and halfway through the course, well, no, 2/3 of the way through the course, just before he was meant to read his finals, he just stopped. And there was no way of convincing him to come back.
I think it's also the fear of having a discussion and the fear of conversation, especially between students and lecturers. I think there is still that stigma that they're two very, very separate entities, which can't be the
Unfortunately,
case.
sometimes lecturers do tend to emphasize that.
Yes,
Unfortunately, some of us do work in that direction and are sort of reluctant to communicate with students.
How can lecturers and students be more empathetic towards each other?
That's a very difficult question for me, because I feel very related, very, very deeply related. I mean, I see students whom I taught 15, 20 years ago. They still keep in touch with me, and we write to each other. Sometimes we have a coffee, and some of them, contact me. I think it's very important that there is this relationship, and of course, as the relationship matures and as the student develops, that relationship stops or fades being a relationship between a teacher and a student, and it starts to turn into a relationship between colleagues, friends. And eventually, possibly your own students, in my case, become your teachers eventually. When they're doing their doctorates, for example, very often they're touching on areas of, which I know nothing about. So they're, pushing new boundaries and they're teaching me. I mean, my position there would be just to give them encouragement, control what they're saying, and try and help them put it in a context that it be understood academically or otherwise. But I am learning from them. I become with PhD students, I am the student.
Last question.
Yes, last question.
Clearly, this is a very deep and serious topic with much to discuss. Is there anything else you'd like to say which we haven't spoken about yet?
Well, yes, the university does have systems. They've been trying to fine-tune ways and means of addressing issues, mental health issues with students and even staff. The staff are, I suspect, a bit more reluctant to admit their mental health issues. Students are usually, sometimes, rarely perhaps, I hope, ashamed or shy to do this, but often they do resort to these systems. Obviously, these systems need to be finely tuned and kept alive.
And spoken about.
And spoken about with the students.
A lot of students aren't even aware.
They don't
so
even
many
know.
systems in place.
You're right. You're right. I mean, I'd be lecturing, and suddenly someone asks you something related to a mental health issue. And they phrase the question, but you'd realize that they're asking for help. And you say, but don't they know that they can get counseling? And the answer is usually, no, they don't know. So it's there, but very many don't know about it.
I'll speak for myself. I only found out about university counseling in my third year.
You see?
My first year and second year, I had no clue it existed. And apart from university counseling, you can also be referred to university psychiatrists.
So there's
so much.
It needs to be popularized.
Yes.
It needs to be made
and the stigma
available.
needs to be
and
brought down.
Stigma, yes.
It's always gonna, unfortunately, it's always gonna be there.
But the issue with stigma is that you don't have to accept it, because stigma is not. You don't put the stigma on yourself, others put it on you. So if you learn to be detached from what others are, if you have a free mind, if you know how to independently think for yourself, okay, you may say, Lalo, he's bald, he has no hair, and I say, well, yes, I'm bald, but I look a bit like, I don't know, who do I look like? Steve Jobs or something like that. So, I mean, and suddenly that stigma, it's a matter of communication. So, but people don't have this strength in themselves to stand up, and especially if they are suffering from mental health, then it is even less. So one needs to be very, very, very careful, because when one has issues of mental health issues, that stigma may very easily be embraced.
Yes, and heightened.
And heightened, yes. And then it becomes something over and above the problem of mental health.
Of course, but I think just being aware that there are so many places, even within university, that are offering to help is that mini step towards lessening the stigma or helping the person. So I genuinely think the question with much to discuss, there is much to discuss, but it needs to be discussed.
It needs to be discussed, and it needs to be discussed openly.
Yes.
There are lecturers who are stiff and don't help their students, and sometimes also do see their students as competition.
Yes.
At a certain level, because their students will be so intelligent that the lecturer becomes afraid of the student, which is, philosophically speaking, a stupid thing.
Yes.
But it's a mental health issue. That feeling of insecurity is an issue that the person needs to address, whether they are a student, and they won't be open to addressing it.
Yes.
So these things need to be spoken, and spoken in very serious terms and in very open ways, and possibly not in public.
Yes, and I also think it shouldn't even be a matter of separating. I know university has a way of separating the students from the lecturers a lot, but I think conversations like this, where you do realize how both the lecturers and the students go through the same things essentially. So having that opportunity to discuss these topics together helps, because you are addressing it together rather than as separate entities, and you're tugging at the same rope rather than playing a tug of war to a certain extent.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And there is this very, very profound principle that when you are listening to someone speaking, whoever you may be, you are their student.
Yes.
This needs to be really well explained, and unfortunately, very often lecturers don't hear this knowledge. So when they were students, they might have been very intelligent, and then they get, to break limits and
their generation would have been taught in a very different way.
Yes, and then they stop there. They stop there. Then they take this podium stand, and they stop being students.
Because they would have been used to their lecturers who took the podium stand. Yes. So it is a matter of.
So this needs to be addressed and dealt with in a serious way.